Hey folks, this is Riker, and this week saw the most hype live stream the aRPG world has ever seen, the announcement of Diablo 4 Season 7, no obviously it was Path of Exile 2. PoE 2 blew everyone away with this early access reveal. We'll give a rundown of everything they spoke about and why I think some of the decisions they've made are particularly genius. Diablo 4 did reveal its Season 7 this week as well. It'll be the season of the Witch Doctor basically. D4 also accidentally had a super exciting one-day holiday event this week. We'll cover all that and other gaming news of the week in this video, including the controversy at the Game Awards. But before we go on, a quick word for this video's sponsor, Displate. As a kid, I'd hang up paper posters all over my walls, but over time they get torn, creased, faded in the sun. Displates are metal posters made from extra durable steel that remain vibrant and colorful for years. I've had displays for years now. My first were some classic Frank Frazetta fantasy artworks, and now I got a bunch of Diablo 2, 3, and 4 displays. There's over 2 million artworks in Displate's catalog. Abstract art, movie posters, video game art. They partner with a bunch of companies, so they got Star Wars, Marvel, Elden Ring, Call of Duty, Warhammer, The Witcher, as we said, Diablo, tons more. And if you're an artist, you can even sell your own prints on Displate. They come in different sizes. They've even introduced a new product called Textra, which are displays with a tactile texture. It's really cool to feel their 3D contours and seeing how they are reflected in the light at different angles. And displays can come in either a matte or gloss finish. But probably the best part about Displate is just how easy they are to mount. If you're worried about making holes in your walls, you don't have to. It's just a simple magnet. You stick it to the wall, and then the metal displate sticks to the magnet. You don't have to be a handyman. It takes seconds to mount a displate. And then you can swap your displates around whenever you want because it's literally just being held by magnets. And when you run out of wall space, they've also now started selling stands where you can mount a displate and put it wherever you want. And with the holiday season coming up, these make for great gifts, and they offer fast delivery within 4 to 5 business days. And you can get big discounts during Black Friday. If you order up to 2 displates, you get 34% off, up to 4 displates gets you 38% off, and 5 or more displates gets you 44% off. This isn't applicable to Limited Edition and Lumino displates, but it is for the first time ever applicable to these Textra tactile displays. So you use my link in the description where the discount will be applied automatically, or use code Riker when you check out to get the biggest display discount of the year. And you gotta act fast because the discount won't last for long. So the biggest news of the week has gotta be Path of Exile 2. We got the game's opening CGI cinematic, the early access gameplay trailer, and an hour-long video with an overview of the content that will be playable and available to everyone in early access. And man, is it looking good. Let's start with the cinematic. I never really got into the story of Path of Exile 1, partially because they didn't have any cinematics, apart from, a couple seconds, I guess. But this cinematic opening to the story of PoE 2 has me instantly hooked. And it doesn't just feel like some generic fantasy story either, it has drawn me into the villain and the setting, and it doesn't feel cliche or like it's trying to imitate something else. It feels like its own thing. Those are all traps that fantasy stories can easily fall into. But now I actually want to see where the story of PoE 2 goes. Then the gameplay trailer. Well, I already played PoE 2 last year, or, the demo of it, I guess. I got to try a bunch of the classes. So I already knew the gameplay was tight, but it's been a while since I played, and just seeing the WASD controls with the moving and aiming and casting all at the same time, it's still looking great. But it's everything else that they dove into during their presentation that got me really hyped. PoE 2 hits early access on December 6th, and even though they won't have the entire game available right away, there's just a ton of content that's going to be there. And that alone is a huge win. But apart from that, a lot of the changes and additions to systems have me really hopeful that PoE 2 is going to do exactly what it needs to in order to reach a broader audience than PoE 1 did, which is be more approachable for casual players. Now, don't get me wrong, there's no way that PoE 2 will be a game for casuals. It's not going to betray the essence of what it is. It's definitely designed for aRPG veterans, but a lot of the pain points that would turn away potential players from PoE look like they're being addressed in PoE 2. And the first way they're tackling that is via skill gems. In PoE 2, the new skill system works like this. You find an uncut skill gem. This is not attributed to any particular skill, the way it would be in PoE 1. This is basically just a skill point that you find. So you use this uncut skill gem to basically get a skill point that you can then allocate into any skill, whether it's to learn a new skill or level up a skill you already have. And let's say you find a level 7 uncut gem, then, well, you can instantly get 7 points into a new skill. There's no more slotting skill gems into your gear and swapping those around as you level up and find new upgrades and having to fuss over gem sockets and the colors and the links and all that. This makes the game so much more approachable now. Now, in addition to standard skills, PoE 2 is introducing spirit skills. These are the category that persistent skills are going to fall under now, like auras and minions. Basically, any skill that previously reserved mana will now be a spirit skill. And we're going to have a new resource called Spirit. And Spirit skills are going to now reserve Spirit instead of mana. So no more running builds that have like 95% reserved mana with that tiny itty bitty amount of mana for you to spam 2 spell casts at a time before you run out of mana. Great change there. So this is where we're going to find skills like Arctic Armor or Raging Spirits. 6 classes will be available in early access, with 6 more to be added later on. So in early access, we're going to have access to the Monk, who uses a quarterstaff and pulls off combo attacks, leaning on ice, wind, and lightning skills. There are 21 active skills for quarterstaffs. Then there's the Warrior, who's a slower melee class who hits hard with ground slams. He's got lots of long animation attacks. I remember playing the Warrior and I had the hardest time with the Warrior, partially because how long those attack animations are. One thing though, you don't have to commit. So it's not like you're locked into that animation. You can roll, you can dodge out of that animation to cancel it. Obviously you don't, pull off the attack, but at least, hey, you're not going to get hit by that telegraphed boss attack. The Warrior also has war cries, and he has totems, and he can use a shield. And in fact, there's a mechanic where you can raise your shield at any time to block all damage coming from the front. So the shield isn't just some like stat stick that's there. You can actively use it to block. I love that. And while your shield is up, you do have a stun meter. As you're taking hits, as you're blocking hits, if your meter fills, then your stance is going to break and you'll become vulnerable. And some enemies just have unblockable attacks, which is pretty fair. And of course, you still have a shield charge skill. Seems the Warrior's main intended weapon is the mace, and there are 20 active mace skills. Then there's the Ranger class, who's primarily a bow user. You can shoot while moving and leap around with great mobility. Bows have lightning, poison, ice, and physical attacks, and there are 21 bow skills. Then there's the Mercenary, who's a crossbow wielder whose shtick is the ability to swap between ammo types. His skills will be able to offer different gunplay styles like shotgun, sniper, assault rifle, even grenade launcher. And you can easily swap between ammo types in combat, so if you see an armored enemy, you can swap to armor-piercing rounds to break his armor, then swap to high-velocity rounds to take him out. You can also summon artillery ballista. There will be 22 active crossbow skills. Then there's the Witch, who's the minion class. Seems they're basically leaning into the Necromancer fantasy fully for the Witch in PoE 2. The Witch will use Spirit to summon permanent minions who revive automatically if they die. In the skill screen, you can allocate Spirit to different minion categories to determine what minions you want in your army. You have basically full control of your army composition. So like skeleton warriors, for instance, are the inexpensive but weak filler minions. But then you got other minion types that are going to cost more but be more powerful. I love this amount of control that we have over our minion army. Permanent minions even have special abilities called command skills. And if I'm interpreting this correctly, it means that every permanent minion will have some active command that we can issue to them, similar to in Diablo 3. And if so, I love this. My first PoE 2 character is going to be a witch, and I can't wait to play a minion build. Scepters are an item type that inherently grant spirit, giving you a bigger spirit pool to be able to grow your army. You can even summon minions, it seems, from corpses, and I think those stay dead when they die. I think they don't cost you any spirit probably, but yeah, once they die, they're dead. And while your army is doing its thing, a witch can cast curses on enemies to weaken them, or cast chaos spells to spread disease, or bone skills to impale enemies. And there are 25 active occult skills. Then lastly, there's the Sorceress, who's your classic elemental mage. There's a lot of combo possibilities with her spells, like you lay down a firewall, and then any projectile you shoot through that firewall, like let's say lightning bolts, are going to get added fire damage on top. Also, PoE 2 keeps the weapon swap ability from PoE 1 and Diablo 2, but now you can have skills set such that you automatically weapon swap when you cast a certain skill. It's such a great quality of life feature. They also spoke about trigger gems when talking about the Sorceress. Trigger gems are things like Cast on Ignite, So you take a trigger gem, you assign it to a main skill like Firestorm, and let's say you got one of these, then as you're going around, you're going to see a little counter as you are igniting enemies, the trigger condition. Once you fill your meter, it's then going to automatically cast the triggered skill, in this case, Firestorm in this example. There's going to be 25 active elemental skills. And one thing to clarify here, while each class is designed with certain weapons and skills in mind, PoE is a game where any class can use any weapon or any skill as long as they meet the attribute requirements. You have full freedom of how to build your character. And as a reminder, these are simply the 6 classes available in early access launch. 6 more will be added later, including the Druid and the Hunter, who's like the D2 Javazon. I got to play both last year. I've got footage from my interview with GGG. Do check out those interviews, by the way. I loved the Hunter gameplay. I've really been missing that Javazon fantasy, and nothing in 20 years has fulfilled that fantasy until now. And the Druid as well, from a shape-shifting perspective, was super cool. So again, we have well over 120 active skill gems. But then there are also support gems. These are gems that can be combined with active skill gems to change how they work. Each skill can have up to 5 support gems attached to it. And again, there's no need to fuss with sockets on gear or anything anymore. You just assign these simply in the skill menu. Great change for greater accessibility. Less frustration, more ease of play. When you find a support gem, it's also going to come with recommendations on which of your skills to use it on. Super helpful for new players. But again, you're free to use it however you want. And there's hundreds of support gems to choose from. Again, overall, I'm really digging this change to the skill system. We get to keep all the awesome customization with support gems while removing the complexity and tedium of managing our gear sockets. Flasks are also being simplified in PoE 2. Flask Piano is gone. Now we only have 2 flask slots, 1 life flask and 1 mana flask. Each flask has enough charges that you can typically use it 6 to 7 times before it becomes empty, and you refill your flask charges by killing enemies. We're also getting a new mechanic, however, to replace the utility of flasks from PoE 1, and they're called charms. By upgrading your belt, you can unlock additional charm slots, which is a new inventory slot for charms, and these are going to automatically consume flask charges to protect you from various debuffs or damage types, like from being frozen or presumably from bleeds. All right, onto the passive tree. It is as big and overwhelming as ever, maybe more so. There are over 1,500 nodes in the passive skill tree. You get 1 passive point per level. Every class shares the same passive tree. Your class just determines where your starting position on the tree is. But here's some new stuff. You can respec the tree with gold. For veteran players, the cost of respecing in PoE 1 is no big deal. But for a new player, getting the specific respec currency, it's difficult. You can easily brick your character, and then, by picking the wrong things in the skill tree, a lot of early players would just spec for pure offense, and then they reach a point where they're dying all the time and they can't figure out how to respec, they can't figure out how to farm the material, they don't have the knowledge or the ability to do it, and their only real choice was to start a new character. Now, with it just being gold, which you can farm anywhere with enough time, right? You go back to easier content, you farm the gold. Now you're not being punished for experimenting or otherwise for not following a build guide. Also, another huge change, attribute nodes. Like strength, intelligence, dex, etc., they are now generic. They let you select whatever attribute you want. And you can also respec it. Let's say you start off with strength, you can respec for half the cost of a typical respec and change it to dexterity. This is great for new and old players alike. Let's say you want to be able to equip a new piece of gear. Well, instead of having to completely redo your tree, you can just go and change that node from strength to dex in order to meet the requirements. Then they also have a system where you can assign passive points to weapon swaps. So when you swap your weapon, you automatically also swap part of your passive tree. Great customization there. And I think that word right there, customization, is what makes me so excited for the class and skill systems in PoE 2. You really get to make whatever kind of build you want. There's just so much choice, so many ways to build your character. And then there's the Ascendancy classes, of course. Each class will have 3, but for early access, we'll have 2 of the 3 available. So for the Sorceress, we're going to have the Stormweaver, which focuses on elemental magic, and the Chronomancer, which has a bunch of time manipulation abilities, which seems really cool. The Warrior will have the Warbringer, which summons spirits and seems to lean on the defensive side. And then there's the Titan, which is all about hitting big. The Ranger will have the Deadeye, which seems like a glass cannon, and then the Pathfinder, who has a unique mechanic to consume flask charges to throw poisonous concoctions. The Witch will have the Infernalist, who gets a Hellhound companion and can actually transform herself into a demon. I gotta go with this with my first character. And then there's the Blood Mage, which makes all skills cost life in addition to mana, but makes enemies drop blood that you can pick up and regain life. The Blood Mage seems focused on life leech and building up a lot of life. The Monk has the Invoker, who's an Elementalist, and the Acolyte of Shayula, who replaces Spirit with a resource called Darkness, which can be used to absorb and deal damage. The Mercenary gets the Gemling Legionnaire, which is all about skill gems. You get extra skill slots, and you get buffs based on stacking support gems. And then there's a Witch Hunter, which is a little hard to describe. It kind of specializes in taking down big targets, I guess. And to get your Ascension class and skill points, you got to do your trials. You need a trial key before you can attempt a trial, and you start finding these in the campaign in Act 2. But unlike in PoE 1, you got a couple options on which trials you can run to get your Ascendancy. One type of trial involves having a resource called Honor. So you're going through rooms, defeating challenges, but every time you get hit, you lose Honor, and if your Honor reaches 0, you fail the trial. I'm personally not a fan of this mechanic, but thankfully, I don't have to participate in this if I don't want to, because we have another way, other trials that you can do that don't involve that. In total, there'll be 3 different ways, but in early access, there's going to be 2 ways available in total. But first, to keep talking about the Honor trial. We got traps that we got to dodge. There are as well roguelike mechanics that I actually think are really cool. Boons that you get as you progress through the rooms, like a second life in case you die. You also can find Sacred Water, which is a currency you can use to trade with a Djinn, who's basically a merchant that you're going to run into that you can buy stuff from, like extra honor, or more boons, or pay him to remove afflictions. Throughout, you're going to find keys that unlock bonus chests at the end. You get to check a map that lets you chart a path through the trial, picking what challenges you face. Obviously, a lot of familiar stuff from PoE. But the second kind of trial available in early access requires a different kind of key, and just has you progressing through chambers with different goals. Some of the chambers' goals will be kill all the monsters. Sometimes it's going to be survive for X amount of seconds. Sometimes it'll be to escort a magic pillar somewhere. And you get choices to make before entering a chamber regarding boons or banes, and at the end of each room, you also have to decide double or nothing. After 3 chambers, you get a random boss, at which point you can spend your Ascension points. Now, we mentioned the campaign. The campaign itself will have 6 acts at launch, intended to take you from level 1 to 65. But in early access, we'll only have the first 3 acts, which take us to level 45, and then, just for early access, we replay the campaign, acts 1 through 3, on a higher difficulty to take us to level 65. On a first playthrough, it'll take a new player about 25 hours to reach the end of Act 3. And the campaign also has lots of permanent boosts or powerful items that you can get via optional fights throughout it, so it's going to be a core part of the progression system. Then for itemization, there's 4 item groups: normal, magic, rare, and uniques. You're going to find currency items that let you upgrade items, as has always been the case. But these currency items are going to be more common than in PoE 1, so we're going to be actively using them a lot during our campaign playthrough to upgrade our gear. You can also disenchant gear to get these currency items. Sockets still exist, but now items only have up to 2 sockets depending on the item type. You put runes in sockets now, and runes add extra mods to items. And if I were a gambling man, I would wager that eventually they're going to add rune words. You can salvage socketed items to get a currency that lets you add sockets to an item. As I mentioned, gold is a thing now, and you can use gold to gamble for items. You can also use gold in the currency exchange, which is an in-game trade house or auction house just for currency items. You always have to pay a gold fee to either list or buy items, is my understanding. And apart from gold, all items in PoE 2 can be freely traded directly with another player. Now, as for content, PoE 2 will be launching into early access with 50 bosses and 400 monster types. and it's going to double the size of its content by the time of full release. Endgame will have 7 systems to progress through, the core of which is the first endgame system, the Atlas. Now, the Atlas was always a system that I liked in Path of Exile, and now I love it even more. It's being reimagined as an infinite map that spreads in all directions. It seems to be procedurally generated and thus unique to every character. Your starting point is a central ziggurat, and from there you progress along maps, having to complete one to move along to the next in its path. To run a map, you must find a waystone. A waystone is just a generic key to run any map. Waystones have different tiers, and that's going to determine the level of monster that you face inside the map. You can also craft on your waystones to increase their challenge and reward. Once you kill all enemies on a map, you unlock that map and can progress further in your Atlas. If you fail, however, then you brick that map. You cannot run it anymore, and you must find another path. And apparently, if you're bad and brick all the maps on your paths available to you, there are fail-safes to ensure you haven't just bricked your whole Atlas. Now, just like in PoE 1, there are tons of random encounters to be found in a map, like strongboxes or monsters frozen in essences. As you progress through your Atlas, you're going to gain points that you can spend in your Atlas tree. This is a progression system that lets you modify the danger and reward of all maps you run. The Atlas has different biomes that are going to affect the maps that you get. You'll find cities where you can find specific items. You're going to run into unique maps. This is even where you're going to unlock hideouts now. For those who don't know, hideouts are player housing. You're also going to run into towers, which are maps that when you complete them are going to reveal big portions of the map around it. Hello, Last Epoch. You can also run into corrupted areas, which have extra danger for extra reward. There's special boss fight maps that you can choose to take on. If you beat them, you get points to allocate in the special boss hunting section of the Atlas tree. And basically for each type of endgame content, there's a separate section of the Atlas tree. I think a general ethos for Path of Exile endgame is the more that you choose to engage with a part of the endgame content, the more you improve your ability to do that content, and the more rewarding it becomes, and the more you can engage with it. I feel every modern ARPG needs some kind of system like the Atlas, something that gives greater context to random maps. I love how PoE 2 is doing it. Instead of just random dungeons with no context, each map is contributing to something greater. We're pathing through this Atlas. We're making choices over which map to run. This really helps avoid monotony in a game that's all about grinding. Now, again, the Atlas serves as the core for engaging with a lot of other endgame systems like Breach. Some maps will have the Breach icon above them. In Breach maps, you're going to run into a mechanic that's going to change how you play. You're going to be rewarded for killing and moving through the map quickly. The faster you kill enemies, the more enemies will spawn and the more loot you get. In Breach maps, you'll be able to find drops that'll let you modify Atlas maps to get more Breach mechanics. So if you really like Breach, you can sustain running Breaches. Each endgame mechanic has powers that can only be found in that mechanic, like Breach rings, and each endgame mechanic also has its own pinnacle encounter. For Breach, you find Breach Splinters, which let you enter a massive Breach map, which ends with fighting the pinnacle Breach boss, and beating that boss gives you points to allocate into the Breach section of your Atlas tree. Then another endgame mechanic is Ritual. Atlas maps can have the Ritual icon. In Ritual maps, you'll run into a Ritual altar. You gotta kill monsters in a circle around the altar, and then once you activate the altar, all those dead monsters are gonna come back to life. The more monsters you feed the altar, the greater the reward you get, and you can use this reward to buy special items from the altar. Then there's a Delirium mechanic. Delirium maps will have a mirror in them, and when you interact with the mirror, a mist starts to spread out from the mirror. You gotta stay inside the mist, and the deeper into the mist you go, the stronger the monsters get, but the better the rewards. Then there's the Expedition mechanic. You'll run into settlers who want your help to dig up artifacts. You have to strategically place explosives to unearth artifacts, having decisions to make. But your digging will also summon monsters. You can then exchange the artifacts that you unearth at a special vendor. Again, each of these leads to some bigger special map version of the mechanic. Those are all the Atlas endgame mechanics. Then there are endgame versions of the 3 Ascendancy trials. They each have progression mechanics, unique rewards, and player power that can only be acquired in them. Then lastly, there is the greatest pinnacle boss of the game, which you're going to find as a fortress in your Atlas. And this is the most challenging content in the game. You're first going to need to beat 3 Uber bosses to get their keys to access the final Pinnacle boss. And to kill the Uber bosses, you'll have to kill their lieutenants first. So yeah, lots of content. Again, early access starts on December 6th at 11 a.m. Pacific on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation, and it's going to run for at least 6 months before full release. They're also planning to have leagues during early access. And while PoE 2 will be free to play at launch, to get into the early access, you gotta spend at least $30 on a supporter pack, or alternatively, if you've already spent at least $480 on lifetime purchases in PoE 1, then you automatically get early access of PoE 2. And it seems like GGG is also offering regional pricing, in some regions at least, which really helps out players from those regions since $30 is a lot of money in some countries. If you're a new player, the $30 supporter pack will let you spend that money in the MTX shop, and I highly recommend buying specialized stash tabs. The currency tab is almost mandatory, and if you ever want to get into trading, you're really going to need a premium tab. I like to say that PoE is free to try. If you really want to get serious with PoE, you're going to want to drop a bit of money into specialized stash tabs, just for the quality of life. And all your purchases from PoE 1 are transferring over to PoE 2, including cosmetics. But yeah, altogether, this reveal was incredibly hype. There were nearly 500,000 people tuning into the PoE 2 category on Twitch during the reveal. Just about everything in the presentation was win after win after win, and every time we were already satisfied with everything that they'd shown, GGG revealed more things, and more things, and more things. If you've held off on PoE 1, or you shied away from it due to its complexity, you felt overwhelmed, PoE 2 is going to be an opportunity for a fresh jumping in point. It's more accessible as well for new players thanks to some of the system changes that we went over, and I can't wait to dive into the early access. Oh, and PoE 1 is getting a new league at the end of February. Now, on to some quick Diablo 4 news. This week saw the release of the mid-season patch and the kickoff of the events that we spoke about last week. Following the patch, Cinder drop rates in Helltide seem insane now. One Blood Maiden event can get you like 750 cinders. The buffs to Conduit Shrines don't quite seem to be enough. Again, not enough damage, and the reduced mobility on top of that makes it feel even worse. The recommendation here continues to be to either temporarily remove Conduit Shrines in Torment 4 or replace them with the Diablo 3 version, ideally, in the long run. And while no one seems particularly excited for this year's version of the Midwinter event, there actually was a surprise event that everyone was really excited for. A bug was discovered with the elixir of anti-venom that was basically causing people to have a huge amount of health and deal big damage. Rather than provide the 15% buff to your life that it says it's supposed to do, anti-venom was giving you 15 times your life. And since Spiritborn can scale damage based on life, well, you can guess what happened next. Speed pit 150s, breaking all records. 150s for everyone. The bug lasted for about a day before Blizzard patched it. And the irony is that this was basically what I was suggesting as an event to run to buff every class but the Spiritborn, right? Spiritborn is a million times stronger than every other class, so give the other classes some crazy silly buff that's only temporary to be competitive with the Spiritborn, just so everyone gets a taste of that Spiritborn power. You know, people were hyped. People played a ton during this elixir bug. And once it was fixed, they peaced out. But man, for that one day, that was one exciting event. We also got this week the Campfire Chat for Season 7, which is looking really promising. The season theme itself is the biggest we've gotten yet. I'm not going to say the entire season is the biggest, given, we had a bunch of new systems added in Season 6. But if we're talking about the theme itself, right, compared to Season 1 theme, 2, 3, etc., Season 7's theme is the biggest yet. It's basically a mashup of Season 2 and Season 1, but now with Diablo 3 Witch Doctor powers instead of blood powers. I've got a full video with a breakdown of everything, including the return of Pyranado. Do check that out. Season 7 will also bring in the Armory, which will allow us to save and swap between different builds. Season 7 will nerf Spiritborn down to reasonable power levels by fixing the bugs and also nerfing the Rod of Kepalepi really hard. Its unique power is going from a 3% bonus down to a 0.5% bonus. Huge decrease there. And amidst the buffs to other classes, there was a surprise nerf to Sorcerer. The Firebolt enchantment will no longer deliver burning. and damage stacking via burning won't really be a thing anymore. So this is basically a nerf to all sorcerer builds, which, pretty much every sorcerer build built for burning to stack that damage. But it does seem like the devs are bringing in other places to make up for that damage loss. We'll kind of have to see when PTR launches where the sorcerer's power level lies. That's going to be on December 3rd. Now, Season 6 already put more pressure on us for stash space, right? We have runes now, that's more stuff to hold on our stash. In Season 7, they're adding more runes, so that's more things to hold. The Dark Citadel added a whole new suite of consumables that we gotta stack up on or otherwise just get rid of, right? We have Scrolls of Restoration. Once we get the Armory, we're gonna need room to store entirely different gear sets per each character that we have. Imagine if you had 5 characters, each with 5 gear sets. So there's just not enough stash space for all of that. Now, most people aren't going to run 5 characters with 5 gear sets, but still, I can see us rapidly running out of stash space here. I think getting specialized stash tabs would be great, like a tab to hold runes at the very least, especially if they plan to keep adding runes every season, because runes are something that we kind of have to stock up on. Now, moving on to some other major industry news, it looks like Sony is trying to acquire Kadokawa, a Japanese megacore and one of the largest entertainment companies in Japan. Kadokawa has confirmed that Sony has made them an offer, but that no decision has yet been made. Kadokawa dominates the anime and manga industry. This acquisition would be enormous for Sony, who already owns Funimation, Crunchyroll, and Aniplex. And it would shake up the market and be a step towards Sony monopolizing the Japanese entertainment industry altogether. They might wonder, why am I talking about this in a gaming news video? Well, Kadokawa has 26 games in development, 20 console games, 6 mobile games, and they also own about 70% of FromSoftware, the developers of Elden Ring. Sony owns about 15% of FromSoftware, and so if Sony acquires Kadokawa, Sony owns FromSoftware. And if that happens, you can say goodbye to Xbox ever seeing a FromSoftware title again. Thankfully, Sony has at least been seeing the value of PC lately. And we're going to wrap up this week's news with some Game Awards talk. The Game Awards have announced its 2024 nominees, selected by a global jury of more than 130 outlets. Astrobot and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth are the leaders this year, each being nominated in 7 different categories. I won't go through every category, but some of the highlights include: the Game of the Year nominees are Astrobot, Balatro, Black Myth Wukong, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and Metaphor ReFantazio. The nominees for Best Game Direction are exactly those same games. Almost like Best Game Direction is not a distinct enough category from Game of the Year. The nominees for Best Ongoing Game: Destiny 2, Diablo 4, Final Fantasy XIV, Fortnite, and Helldivers 2. Best Role-Playing Game: Dragon's Dogma 2, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, and Metaphor ReFantazio. Best Community Support: Baldur's Gate 3, Final Fantasy XIV, Fortnite, Helldivers 2, and No Man's Sky. Best Action Game: Black Myth Wukong, Black Ops 6, Helldivers 2, Stellar Blade, and Space Marine 2. Best Multiplayer: Black Ops 6, Helldivers 2, Super Mario Party Jamboree, Tekken 8, and Space Marine 2. Diablo 4 was also nominated in the Innovation in Accessibility Award. Now, there's been some controversy over Shadow of the Erdtree being nominated for Game of the Year. Yes, everyone agrees that it is a fantastic expansion to Elden Ring, but it's not a standalone title, and you can't even access it until you are well into the base game. So some people feel that it's a bit unfair for a past Game of the Year winner from 2022 to release an expansion that expands upon what made the base game excellent to now just come in and win Game of the Year again. Some think that there should be a separate category for best DLC, that it's not fair to the 2024 games if Shadow of the Erdtree would win. But what do you folks think? Do you think it's fair to those new games released in 2024? Why or why not? Sound off in the comments. Outside of the Game Awards, the Golden Joysticks Awards, which is 100% fan voted, gave PC Game of the Year to Satisfactory and Ultimate Game of the Year to Black Myth Wukong. Helldivers 2 won Best Multiplayer Game and Console Game of the Year. Shadow the Erdtree won Best Game Expansion. Thank you for having a separate category for that, Joystick Awards. And Balatro won Best Indie Game. And that's going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to check out last week's video in which we discussed why we think a Diablo 1 remaster may be coming up. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.